afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Portland's Friday Forum, Oregon's premier public affairs forum. I'm Sharon Van Sickle Robbins, and I would like to welcome all of you, those here today at the Governor Hotel, and those of you listening on OPB or KBPS radio, or watching on Portland Community Media's CityNet 30. Thank you for joining City Club today on February 25th for this week's Friday Forum. In consideration of those sitting close to you and those in our radio and television audiences, would everyone please make sure your cell phones are silenced? Today we will hear from Congressman Earl Blumenauer about how we can tackle this upcoming decade of tough economic decisions. But first, a few announcements. I'd like to thank all of our media partners, including Oregon Business Magazine. I'd also like to offer our appreciation to the Friday Forum corporate sponsors, whose generous financial support makes these forums possible. We're extremely pleased to have as our winter quarter sponsors Stoll Reeves, which has an entire table here today. We'd like you to stand. We'll honor you. The Standard and West Coast Bank. So please join me in expressing our appreciation. If your company or firm would like to be a City Club sponsor, please contact City Club staff at the back of the room or call the City Club offices. This spring, City Club will offer a coordinated series of thought-provoking programs that will challenge conventional political wisdom and explore genuinely innovative and long-term solutions to Oregon's fiscal crisis. Kicking off with a talk by Governor John Kitzhaber on March 4th, that's next Friday, City Club's Friday Forums and other events will investigate new ways to stimulate economic development, improve government services, and ensure adequate revenue. Keep your eyes open for more about our spring series, From Crisis to Opportunity, Exploring Solutions to Oregon's Fiscal Challenges. And now to today's program. Since the near collapse of the financial system a couple of years ago, both the United States and Oregon have struggled to get their economies moving. The federal government faces significant challenges in crafting sustainable funding for Social Security and Medicare, scaling defense spending for the 21st century threats, and continuing to invest and innovate in critical areas like education. Though daunting, none of these challenges has been unforeseen. Today, Congressman Earl Blumenauer will describe unique opportunities for Oregon to better align its plans with federal priorities, and will explain how these adjustments will help both national and state programs to become more sustainable and effective. A lifelong Portland resident, Mr. Blumenauer began his public service in 1972 when he was elected to the Oregon legislature. He went on to serve 8 years on the Multnomah County Commission and a decade on the Portland City Council. Elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1996, he has created a unique role as Congress's chief spokesperson for livable communities, places where people are safe, healthy, and economically secure. He has served as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee and was vice chair of the Select Committee on Energy Independence and Global Warming from 2007 to 2010. He's currently a member of the Ways and Means Committee and the Budget Committee. And now please help me welcome today's speaker, Congressman Earl Blumenauer.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you for the warm welcome. One hesitates to correct, but I think my first public service dated to a 1971 City Club study committee. That's how I always regard it. And I do appreciate the opportunity to be with you this afternoon. The City Club is an important forum for our community. I always try to give it some of my best thoughts, and when I have an important announcement to make, I try and make it here. I can announce today that I have, thanks to the hard work of, many of you know Julia Pomeroy, my chief of staff, who decided that my wearing a glowing neon bike pin with Arthur the Aardvark, trying to talk seriously about protecting public broadcasting, was stepping on my message. And I got back to the office yesterday to find 25 little pewter bicycle pins, one for every lapel that I have in Oregon and in Washington, D.C. And I thought I would just try it out here with the City Club to see if it added gravitas to my... We'll wait and see if it works. But I would say that that this is a sort of day where we're just amazed by the headlines that are greeting us every morning, the riveting stories on NPR: hope, opportunity, danger, challenge. And I will tell you that it is reinforcing the existence that I have, where there are two competing worldviews. One of them deals with these headlines of turmoil and upset from Tripoli, Cairo, Bahrain to Madison, Wisconsin, as evidence of the massive overreach of the Obama administration, or its incompetence, or both. Problems that are caused by massive spending and unprecedented takeover of America's healthcare system, which threatens to turn us into a great big version of Greece. This is a situation that is so dire, that without $60 billion of spending cuts concentrated in 1/6 of the budget for the next 7 months, we can, and perhaps we should, shut down the federal government next week, and perhaps refuse to consider increasing the debt limit for United States borrowing later in this spring. This is part of the narrative that helped elect 87 Republican freshmen to Congress and at least 4 senators last fall. And according to the news accounts, this is what they're hearing from at least some of their constituents this week. There is another version of this alternative universe, that the deficit is driven by 2 unfunded wars, unnecessary, critical necessary efforts to avert the near collapse of the economy, which was made worse by expensive tax cuts with an unfunded prescription drug benefit thrown in for good measure. The so-called government takeover of healthcare, which was judged, by the way, the political lie of the year by PolitiFact for 2010, following the death panel lie of the year for 2009, that this is a reform that doesn't just allow 33 million additional Americans to have access for health care, but it allows personal choices for doctors and insurance plan, and actually will save families and small businesses money compared to the path that we are on. The budget enacted by the House last week concentrated, as I said, only 1/6 on the budget, was unwise and reckless. And threats to impose them via government shutdown, or even the threats of a default on the national debt, are the crudest attempts at political blackmail and must be rejected out of hand, lest these irrational demands escalate further. Two somewhat opposed competing narratives. Welcome to my world. You can understand why the highlight of my week until this noon was the root canal that I was given Wednesday. First, let's be clear. We're not Greece. The world is lending us huge sums of money at very low interest rates. In fact, the percentage of the gross domestic product that we're spending for interest is only 1.4% of the gross domestic product, the lowest that has been since I was on my first study committee at the City Club in 1971. Second, part of this narrative disturbs me, the notion that somehow organized labor is the enemy, And I'm pleased that some of my friends from organized labor are here today. The president of the AFL-CIO, the head of the building trades, an officer of the firefighters here in Portland. You know, no union lobbyist made a hash out of the tax code. And it wasn't the leaders of organized labor that had their hands on the steering wheel when the economy almost went in the ditch, dealing with what Warren Buffett described as weapons of mass financial destruction. And I think, you know, we ought to pause for a moment and acknowledge that the highest rate of sustained economic progress for American families in history was when there was the highest percentage of participation of organized labor in the workforce. Coincidence? Coincidence? You know, and I'll be the first to admit that I believe in real collective bargaining. In fact, when I was on the city council and my good friend Bud Clark gave me the personnel bureau when every single city contract was expired, I had a chance to do it. And I didn't get a labor endorsement for 10 years. But that's okay. That's how the system should work. If both sides stand up and do it in good faith, we're all better served. And I am convinced that with labor leaders like we have here today, with the leadership like we have in Salem with Governor Kitzhaber, Oregon can and will continue to show how labor and management can work together to solve our problems. And that's a model we all have to engage in. We do have serious long-term problems. And it is made a little more complicated dealing with the pervasive influence of money and special influence in the political process. And I'm not just talking about campaign contributions, but about lobbyists and associations and think tanks and the shouting heads on television and radio that support them. I mean, this is an odd climate, and it is complicated, and it's hard to work through. And it's hard sometimes for the voice of people to be heard and for facts to come through. But I think we have the capacity to be able to cut through the noise and the clutter to be able to make some meaningful progress on the problems that face us. And we have the capacity to redirect the direction America is following without draconian budget cuts, kneecapping Big Bird, or significant new tax increases. Instead, in fact, cutting budgets and or raising taxes won't get us where we need to go. We've got to do business differently. And I think we should be clear about what those problems are. The drivers behind our deficit are, first of all, spiraling healthcare costs, defense spending, and the tax breaks that are built into the Internal Revenue Code, all of which are increasing faster than the rate of inflation and our long-term ability to pay or even borrow to finance. Let me repeat, there is a path forward that does not need to reduce our standard of living or increase taxes. It's all about using resources properly and wisely. We are already paying far more than what we are receiving, more than what we need. We're spending almost twice as much on health care as any of those other top 10 reviled countries that you hear people scared of, you know, like Canada and France and Germany, all of whom pay far less, and although they have terrible healthcare systems, their people get sick less often, they get well faster, and they live longer. make no mistake about it, we have some of the best health care in the world. Most of the people I serve within Congress have access to it. It's just not universally available. The public, at some level, knows the system isn't working right, and it's not fair. Most of the people I represent have seen their net worth drop on an order of magnitude of 20% or more in the last couple years. They have seen their economic future become cloudy. They see college funds shrink and retirements being postponed. Well, let's look at some of these things that people may be cranky about, that things that we can address. First and foremost is one that Oregon can be a significant national leader. We are already, and that's in healthcare. First, let me say we have precisely America's best qualified governor to help guide us along this path. John Kitzhaber has studied and worked on this reform agenda for decades, and he's ready to go. Embedded in the reform package that some of us fought so hard for in Congress is every single proven provision that will help us bring down health care spending. And it spotlights the Oregon approach of focusing on quality, improving the patient experience, and properly aligning financial incentives. If everybody in America practiced medicine the way that it is practiced in metropolitan Portland and most of the rest of Oregon, there would be no Medicare crisis. None. Well, people ask, well, why is it different in Oregon? And I don't have a precise answer, but I do know that I'm proud to represent an area of the country where our healthcare leaders embrace the philosophy of delivering healthcare services more as a mission-driven enterprise than a profit-driven one. We sometimes take for granted how rare that mindset and that performance is. Hospitals in, I don't want to name names, but Miami, compete to build emergency rooms in wealthy suburbs, and they publicly acknowledge that they're encouraging people to use the most expensive type of health care. A 65-year-old man retiring in Portland and a 65-year-old man retiring in Miami, same profile, same health history. The Portland retiree will cost about half as much as the one retiring in Miami. They freely admit that the margins they can charge insurance companies for an ER visit are so much higher than a scheduled visit to a family physician or even an urgent care center that this kind of inefficient, expensive health care is a no-brainer for their bottom line, and they get to get away with it. Oregon is different. In our community, hospitals support medical homes to prevent unnecessary emergency room admittance. Hospitals, physician groups, and payers come together to develop programs to better coordinate care after a hospital stay because they know that you can prevent a readmission to a hospital. Patients get better faster, and it dramatically lowers costs. We have some of the lowest readmission rates in the country, yet we know we can do better, and people are working on it. With 5% of our population accounting for almost half the Medicare costs, and with the examples that we've established here, we know that we can, in fact, reward value over volume, and we can redirect the biggest single threat to the nation's fiscal health. The Congressional Budget Office has estimated we will save the federal budget $230 billion in the next 10 years, even as we add 33 million Americans to the ranks of the insured. It's $1 trillion after another 10 years. Unfortunately, some of my colleagues' response to a problem is to want to throw sand in the gears of reform. This is not the time to slow it down, or even worse, stop it. This is the time to accelerate what we know works and lock in more savings and do it sooner. The fact that Oregon was just awarded a $50 million grant by the administration is testimony to our progress. This should be the mission, however, of not just the healthcare community. Every single person in this room has a stake in advancing this agenda, in being involved with a rational dialogue about reform, end-of-life care. I mean, you pick your topic, but it's important for us all to be engaged because this is hanging in the balance right now, and there's no guarantee that it's going to go forward smoothly. I have to mention defense spending, not because there's a big Oregon agenda that we're all going to move forward and be able to implement, but you have to understand the role that that plays in destabilizing our budget. We are muscle-bound with a nuclear arsenal many times larger than we need by any stretch of the imagination. And we are currently spending billions of dollars to defend West Germany from the Soviet Union more than 20 years after both countries ceased to exist. Our forces are organized superbly to fight past wars. But increasingly, there are elements that are irrelevant to the challenges we face today. Look at the scandal that faced the equipment of our troops when they were rushed into Iraq without body armor, without troop carriers that worked. And there are a number of Oregonians that paid the price for that. Well, what about the events of North Africa, in the Middle East, the war on terror? How much of our security apparatus and our Department of Defense is really in tune and effectively spent to deal with the challenges that we face today, not 10, 30, or 50 years ago? I will be prepared to argue that it's not appropriately focused. When we have more people in this country with top secret clearance than who reside in the state of Delaware, you're paying for a lot more than you're getting, and there's lots of opportunities for people to get confused, lose messages, not understand the memo that says, oh, Osama bin Laden threatens attack on the United States, from August of 2011. In dollar terms, when we can have a Barney Frank and a Ron Paul jointly agree to take $100 billion out of the Department of Defense, I think there's something that can happen with our Tea Party Republicans and progressives that can unite on this. And in fact, we did have a positive vote last week where 123 Democrats, 110 Republicans voted to eliminate the second engine for the F-35. Bipartisan action is possible, and common sense can sneak its way in. Well, what do we think about the tax code? You know, speaking of expensive entitlements, our tax code is inefficient, it's complex, and it's unfair. It is Exhibit A for justifiable citizen frustration and even anger. It no longer effectively pays for what America needs. It undermines our competitiveness. We waste money, lose revenue, even as we encourage people to mine and farm the federal government rather than improve their own services and products in the marketplace. It must be our charge, and this is one where there is an Oregon connection. My colleague, Senator Ron Wyden on the Senate Finance Committee is very interested in this, but I think all of us have a stake in a rational revenue system and working for a way that we can explain to any person with a reasonable attention span and normal intelligence a set of facts, principles, and options to engage them in tax reform. Otherwise, the tax battle will be won by the people with the most money, the best lawyers, lobbyists, and accountants, and the American economy will be the loser. Meaning no disrespect to my friends who are attorneys, accountants. You're great, but many of you complain you'd rather be spending your time more productively than playing games with the code. I hope this year to engage in a series of conversations I call fiscal fitness, to work with Oregonians on principles for a tax code that makes sense. Let's ask some fundamental questions. Do we want to tax work, or do we want to tax investment? Do we want to tax wealth and property, or consumption, or use? And do we want to favor some, or treat everybody equally? We never really spend much time on these fundamental principles, which I think would help us answer some of these complex questions. We're not going to reform the tax code overnight, and even if we are able to move forward with dramatic reform, we have to be sensitive that these changes would have dramatic effect on everything from home values to investments that people have made in their business. So we have to do it clever. We have to be clever about it. We've got to be sensible, but we ought to start on it now. I'm thinking that we might consider getting a little public attention for the exercise by highlighting some of the most egregious portions of the tax code. You remember Senator Proxmire had his Golden Fleece Award for wasteful government spending? And forgive me, Andy, I haven't quite got past the Golden Giveaway Award, or the Platinum Funnel, or whatever. But, let's pick some of these out, like a grantor retained annuity trust, carried interest for billionaire hedge fund managers, some of these massive, outdated, unnecessary big oil tax giveaways. There's something I think we might be able to do with this, and maybe we can find a way for you to text, tweet, or Facebook your choice, and we can use social networking, right, to really carry this message much more broadly. Another critical area for Oregon leadership deals with developing a partnership with the federal government to support agriculture for the future. Federal farm programs are not by any stretch of the imagination the biggest source of waste and inefficiency, but they're perhaps the clearest example, and one that punishes Oregon farmers and ranchers, 87% of whom are left out entirely because the subsidies go for people who, in a few states, who grow cotton, rice, corn, soybeans. Oregon has the misfortune of just growing food, nursery products, spectacular wine, and that's not worthy of significant federal support. Wrong. We can dramatically reduce the spending and take a small amount of the savings and support Oregon farmers and ranchers with research and product development, with helping them be the stewards of the land that they want to be, pay them to improve water quality and water quantity and change farming practices to be able to protect the environment, protect habitat, and actually save the rest of us money. And maybe along the way, we could help the farmers with direct marketing at farmers markets. We're already the American capital, right? We have over 100 of them, but let's give them permanent homes and help them move further. Let's subsidize putting fresh, healthy food in our schools rather than these subsidized commodities to supersize our kids. This has tremendous potential to show people how we can do business differently, while it brings together Oregon farmers and ranchers with people in the urban area, making our state wealthier, protecting our heritage, and frankly, giving us a path to the future that will make a big difference nationally. Now, I want to conclude in one other area of doing business differently, because I think there's an opportunity for us to bring people together all across the political spectrum, environmentalists, business people, conservatives, liberals, to, of course, well, we have to deal with how we're going to rebuild and renew America. I'm not going to give you a speech about livability and streetcars and bicycles and how we improve transit and alternative energy and energy efficiency in our building, all this green construction. I won't do that. You've heard it. And there are too many in this room who can give it better than I can. But we have to respect what a critical part that is of who we are, what sets us apart, what is adding value, and has an opportunity again to bring people together. I suppose there's one last thing we can think about in this vein, and that is how we protect the environment and the marketplace through rules and regulations that work better. The President called recently for a review of the rules and regulations that don't work very well. No, we don't want ones that don't work very well. And I really was pleased that he said, some of them are really important. Food safety, airline safety, we want to protect those. I have been to the White House arguing that there's a different way of framing it, not good regulations and bad regulations, but how we create the regulatory process in the first place, making it performance-driven. We've got a great example right here. The EPA wants to have cryptosporidium protections, new filtration treatments, and they should be very cautious about this. But we haven't had a trace since 2002. Nothing. And in fact, we've been working with EPA on a pilot project together for over 2 years. Nothing. Is there a way that we can convince the federal government to partner with us on a performance base, hold us accountable for performance, but not for tens of millions of dollars of unnecessary expense? That's not liberal or conservative. It's not pro or anti-environment. It's common sense. We've got another one flowing outside on the riverfront. We have spent, pick a number, 200 million, 300 million, since I've been in Congress studying cleaning up the Willamette River, the Superfund site in Lower Harbor. And we have cleaned up exactly nothing. Is there a way that we can stop studying, stalling, suing, and focus on something that is performance-based, that actually cleans up the river for less cost in my lifetime? This is very personal to me. I got caught up in this 25 years ago as a member of the Portland City Council and dealing with river quality. We had this Superfund designation when I went into Congress 15 years ago. Can we work collaboratively, thoughtfully, forcefully, but performance-based and get the job done? I think The performance-based approach to regulation is the wave of the future that will reduce political friction, save money, and get better outcomes in the financial arena, in the environmental arena, in the consumer arena, and I think we're smart enough to do it. Now, every time I'm at the City Club, I talk too long, I have too long a list, and perhaps too theoretical. I plead guilty to maybe talking too long with too long a list. I hope this isn't theoretical. I've been trying to think in terms of what we can do as Oregonians that's going to make a difference for us right now and be part of a national model. How we bring people together to realize the promise of healthcare reform and build on our foundation. How we can bring rural and city people together with a new vision for agriculture that's better for our environment, our pocketbook, and our kids. How we can have performance-based environmental regulation as the next wave of protection that's faster, cheaper, and better. I think if the heroes today in Egypt, Tunisia, Libya can use social networking skills and courage to change established and in some cases very violent regimes, we might be able to overcome some special interests, some inertia, and financial forces right here. The people that we're working against aren't evil, and to a certain extent, it's us, our inertia, our habits. One person's loophole is another person's necessary tax incentive, like my home mortgage deduction, right? But I think that if we care enough about America and Oregon and our families, I think we can lead our own effort at transformation. Thank you very much.
The first question for our speaker, as always, will be from our Friday Forum host, and our host today is City Club Governor Leslie Moorhead. Leslie is a consultant providing financial management services for small businesses. She served on the City Club's research board for 5 years and is currently the secretary of the Board of Governors. She received the club's research award in 2007 and the club's Member of the Year award in 2010. Leslie?
Thank you, Sharon. Congressman Blumenauer, I want to ask a question that you've touched on already, and it's a Portland question, and you've already talked quite a bit about Portland. So I want to give this question in the context of what you've already said. There's currently a lot of speculation here on whether or not you will come back to Portland to run for mayor. I'm not going to ask you if you are going to run for mayor, but I will refer to an op-ed piece in the Oregonian a few weeks ago that speculated on this possibility and which brought up this question. Portland is known for being very progressive in terms of livability and sustainability. Probably the majority of Portlanders are delighted with many of the progressive ideas you've championed over the years: bicycling, light rail, green building practices, and so on. But it is true that many Portlanders are not happy with local government support for these initiatives also, and they simply think things like bike paths, bioswales, and eco-roofs are silly and too expensive. So how would you, as mayor of Portland, or someone who might be advising the next mayor of Portland, convince all Portlanders that non-auto transportation and energy-efficient construction is in Portland's best interest both now and for the future?
Thank you, Leslie, for not asking that question. One of the things that is a responsibility for us all is to be clear that we have not engaged in an effort to make our city the most livable in the United States by indulging in some, what my late friend Bill Robertson would call arts and crafts. Our efforts for giving people transportation choices like light rail, streetcars, bicycles, walking, are about empowering people, and they are the most cost-effective mechanisms that are available to us. It wasn't pie in the sky, it was because we couldn't afford not to. If we were going to handle the traffic in downtown Portland by widening freeway lanes instead of transit alternatives and making some significant costly investment in downtown housing, downtown Portland would be a wasteland. We would have invaded our neighborhoods with more concrete, and Portland would be one more example of a failed city that people wished for the good old days. Instead, we made some hard choices, and it was very brutal at the time. My legislative district was going to have the Mount Hood Freeway right through the middle of it. And my constituents were evenly divided, 50-50, and some of my friends in organized labor were a little cranky about the decision to not go forward with it, as was some newspapers. I mean, it was controversial at the time. But we were able to invest $800 million in light rail, in revitalizing facilities for the port, for people throughout the metropolitan area, and we started a different direction. And what we've done today is that we actually have less congestion in our communities, and we have watched these neighborhoods blossom. I take people on tours of Portland, walking tours on streets like Alberta that I wouldn't have driven them through 25 years ago. This is what works. Everybody on a bike is somebody who's not in a car in front of you. And you can park, 12 of them in one parking space for a car. It's why 100 businesses have either already requested or have removed car parking for bike parking, because that's 12 people who will buy their books in an independent bookstore or drink their coffee, or it works. Our challenge is to be clear about why we do it, how the bioswales is part of the cheaper, greener, faster, rather than investing in lots of concrete and treatment. Wildflowers. I used to get compliments because we planted wildflowers in the road right-of-way. Well, yes, there was an explosion of beauty in the spring, but it also cut down on road maintenance costs. We didn't have to send the gang mowers out. So I think no Portlander should be bashful about standing up for why we did it, and if at any point it stops being cost-effective, then flog them or me or whoever. But until that happens, I think we ought to be clear and we ought to continue on the path that we're going. There's a reason that people come here to look at what we've done and then go back and try and do it in their cities.
We will now take questions from the floor. We've got about 15 minutes for questions. Typically, asking questions at Friday Forums is a privilege of City Club membership, but we have a lot of guests here today, so if any of you have a burning question that you would like to ask the Congressman, you go over here by this mic to my left and you get in line. Before asking your question, please identify yourself if you are a City Club member and ask your questions in 30 seconds or less. I have this question mark card, and I'm not afraid to use it if we don't hear your question in 30 seconds. So.
I'm Greg McPherson, and I am a City Club member, and I urge anybody here who is not to sign up.
15 extra seconds for that.
Congressman, thank you for a thought-provoking presentation. The last two federal administrations have managed to lose Congress during the course of their 8 years, and it looks as though this one might be halfway there. If the American people are going to insist on divided control of their federal government, would the progressive agenda you care about be better served by controlling the White House or the Congress?
Well, Greg, I would rather not choose. I plan on doing my best to work for my team. But one of the things that I think is important about the things that we just finished talking about is that they should be able to move forward regardless of what team is in charge. I think it's going to be a little harder with some of the folks in the House now, but I mentioned that F-35 vote. And I mentioned the agricultural reform, regulatory reform. I think these are things that if we do our job right, if we lay the foundation, and more important than my doing it, that if there are people like you in this room today are represented, I will bet 2,000 groups and organizations, professional, churches, synagogues, educational, sorority, I mean, you name it. If we do a better job as citizens of trying to hold elected officials accountable, and we're able to articulate what our concerns are, and we keep it simple, I think this can be accomplished. I mean, I can think of a few examples where it wouldn't work, but in the main, I think this should be something that can be accomplished regardless of party. And I think if we do a good job advancing it, it might help take the temperature down a little bit and give them something constructive to do rather than some of the goofy stuff.
Peter Fenner, member of City Club. This may be a softball question for you because I'm not sure how you voted, but I very much applaud your performance-based results ideas. Could you explain why Congress continues to subsidize corn-based ethanol year after year when it's long been proven to be ineffective?
It's almost entirely political in nature. It started off as maybe a good idea, but once it got entrenched and there were literally billions of dollars flowing in this direction, economic interests were aligned. People felt like they need to support their corn growers and the people who are the ethanol producers. It's extraordinarily frustrating for me. I work with some of my Republican friends like Jeff Flake. You know, we're trying to eliminate it, and it doesn't have to be partisan, and the facts are clear that it takes almost as much energy as it consumes. It's a giveaway from the taxpayer. And we've watched commodity prices skyrocket. This doesn't help feed poor people around the world. And it's one of the reasons we have a dead zone the size of New Jersey at the mouth of the Mississippi River. But this is going to be one of them that's going to be tough to unwind. And it's one we didn't get as much support as I thought. But I think this is one where there may be a meeting of the minds between some of the Tea Party Republicans and some of the people in the environmental community and progressive community to be able to push this through. One of the problems is we never stop campaigning, and candidates, as they speak, are getting nailed in Iowa for ethanol support, and they get locked in, and it's hard to pivot.
Chris Andre, City Club member and producer at KBOO 90.7 FM Community Radio. My question is related to the previous ones. This regards subsidies, which are more or less entrenched private sector market-based entitlements. The link between schools and logging goes back to the 19th century. These are kind of locked in this death embrace. It used to be we had lots of trees and not so many children. Now we have lots of children, not so many trees. My question is there any way that we can promote innovative, low-impact, new industries in rural communities, thereby saving what really is the very last of our natural capital? Are we tied? Are we this timber payments? Are we school and education and timber tied together forever? Because I think this is crippling us in many ways.
Great point. And we are facing, we've had a dramatic decline in economic activity along with timber harvest in a number of rural Oregon counties. And it actually affects us a little bit here in Portland because the state equalizes. So we pay a little bit of this price. It's not just what happens in Josephine County closing their libraries. We had some fascinating conversations this last month with the administration, looking for, getting the county payments program reinstituted. It's a new program, and 50% of the money goes to Oregon. It's about as close to an earmark as you're going to get. We have been arguing that would there be a way for us to have a little more aggressive assistance in doing things like pre-commercial thinning, dealing with some of the problems about forest load around our communities that are fire prone, that we could use that for biomass generation, that could generate some money, that could actually improve forest health, the safety of our communities, and put people to work at family wage jobs. I think there's an opportunity to put something together in this regard, and we've been arguing that to the administration, and so far they're at least nodding, and I will say I appreciate what my colleague Jeff Merkley, Senator Wyden, Peter DeFazio, Greg Walden, people are trying to make this case, and I think we may make some progress on it.
I'm Bill Harris, a City Club member. As feedback to you, I think you distinctly were not theoretical in your presentation today, but quite clear. I would like for you to speak to the question, under what circumstances do you envision the Congress being able to contend pretty directly with not small, but large cuts in the so-called defense budget and expenditure toward transition of the tens of thousands of weapons-making employees?
Part of this is going to be our success in engaging the American public. The majority of people in the United States, if given the chance, they strongly support a robust, strong military. But they have a suspicion that we could do a better job with a lot less money. Being able to translate that, part of it is going to be standing up to the pressures of political engineering, where weapon systems are just by coincidence manufactured in 30 different congressional districts. And so, you know, people say, yeah, I'm not certain this is such a good idea, but it's 1,000 jobs in my community, and we can't afford to lose these good-paying family wage jobs. Part of it is having a constructive alternative that puts people to work on things that will make a difference. I'd rather have them manufacture streetcars than missile defense. There was a great editorial a week ago in the Oregonian. Mr. Chamberlain, Mark Edlund talked about the value that is created on some of this arts and crafts stuff, you know, green construction and transportation. It is more job intense than some of the huge projects of the past. We just need to have an alternative path for constructive involvement of people, putting them to work on products that make a difference. I think the public is there. The magnitude of the Defense Department budget that is going up faster than inflation, with lots of stuff that doesn't make any sense anymore, I think can be tilted. I thought getting rid of the second engine was a step in the right direction. We have other weapons targets that, to his credit, Obama and Secretary Gates are advancing. And if we can concentrate on that, I think there's a real opportunity to change the curve, but put people to work on things that are going to enrich our communities, create just as many jobs, and I'll guarantee you America will be just as safe. We will be actually at risk if we're a country that can't have an economy that works, that can't put people to work, that doesn't have hope for our families and our children in the future. And that's part of the equation.
Kurt Wavering, member. I want to stay on the defense issue. Obama has said that he would start withdrawing troops from Afghanistan this summer. Could you tell us what you understand, what the conversations are going like in Washington about that, and what your position is about not just reducing by a few, but by many, the number of troops we have there?
Well, it's no secret that I'm a huge fan of the president. I was proud to support him early. I think the administration has done an outstanding job in a wide variety of areas. The president did an exemplary job of sort of going in and looking at all the elements in Afghanistan. I mean, he really did a thorough review. I agreed with everything he did but his conclusion. And this is one where I just respectfully part company. I think doubling down in Afghanistan was not the way to go. I am absolutely convinced that we will end up with a result that we could have negotiated 10 years ago without the loss of life, without the money. We did some calculations. For 1 month of what the United States spends in Afghanistan, we could hire every Afghani between 16 and 65 and pay them above the national average wage for a year. You could rent the country. I don't mean that flip, but I mean you just think of what could happen with helping with water and schools and negotiating with incredibly bad people. But we've got some warlord thugs that we're working with now, and we're finding out, well, there are less bad people in the Taliban, and that's where we're going to end up. We're going to have a negotiated settlement. I sincerely believe that the administration is going to honor what the president said. We're going to be seeing troops coming out this summer. I think they would rather do it more rapidly than slower, but I will just be convinced that the last two administrations have miscalculated on Afghanistan. And if we had been smarter in Berlin in 2002, was it? We could have negotiated something like this out that would have had just as good a result, done it sooner and at far less damage and cost.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Tedesco. I'm a City Club member. And I'd like to pick up Leslie's first line of inquiry and ask you, I'm not going to ask you if you've decided to run for mayor, but I would like to ask you if you are seriously considering a run for mayor.
One of the things that is really corrosive in the political process is that campaigns never stop. And I mean this sincerely. We're halfway through the presidential election again, and it has colored events in the Senate and in the White House. The last thing somebody in City Hall needs is for them to think I'm looking over their shoulder. The last thing I need is to be distracted from the job that I was just elected to do. But I think that we all will help the political process if we'll focus on performance and results, if we will wait until it's campaign season to campaign, if we move away from the horse race and who's ahead and this poll and what might, and instead we're trying to make sure that every man and woman who's in office now, we help them succeed. I will do anything to help the city of Portland be successful. But I'm not being coy. I just think that this is not healthy. This is not good for democracy to never let campaigns stop.
Unfortunately, we have run out of time for further questions and will have to stop for the day. Join us next week when Governor John Kitzhaber will kick off City Clubs from Crisis to Opportunity series on Oregon's fiscal health. And as we close, please join me in thanking Congressman Earl Blumenauer for joining us today.